Obviously, we have the session starting next week. Very excited about that, and have some significant priorities, which always start with this economy, jobs and the economy, and trying to do anything and everything that we possibly can to make sure that our fellow Floridians have the best opportunity to have gainful employment. You know, when you have an 11.8% unemployment rate in your state, I think it's very important to be focused on that first and foremost. I know that President Atwater is, Speaker Friedel is. I'm very pleased about that. And we have the jobs proposal. We want to do several things that we think will help. Continue to fund OTED, appropriately, Office of Tourism, Trade, and Economic Development. They have been very, very helpful in this part of the state, keeping Piper aircraft here. We also want to continue to recruit businesses from out of state to come to Florida, along with Crist, which has been a real point of light, if you will, along with Torrey Pines, Mox Planck, so many others that are part of this new cluster that really has evolved. To my predecessor's credit, Governor Bush, it was a bold initiative to pursue biotechnology, and it's really paid enormous dividends for Florida. In addition to jobs in the economy, I think it's important that we focus on education. I'm a public school kid and a proud graduate of one of our state universities, Florida State. And I've recommended, at the recommendation of Chancellor Brogan, $100 million more for higher education. I think the emphasis on our universities will also pay dividends in terms of economic opportunity for our people. A better educated people makes for a better job market opportunity for them. And I think that, we have great community colleges. We call them state colleges now because so many have a four-year degree opportunity. But our universities have been tremendous. FAU, with its association with Scripps, is a prime example. Central Florida with Burnham Institute. The University of Florida speaks for itself. It's done great work with so many of these innovative ideas. And continuing to nurture that, I think, is an important part of what we do with this budget this year. And I'm proud of what we've been able to do in K through 12. There's been additional funding, but I think there's been even more so additional effort. And what I mean by that, again, to my predecessor's credit, is a focus on accountability, taking the measure of what happens in the classroom, grading our schools in a way that parents can see what's happening in the classroom, pay good teachers more. When I got elected, we were 31st in the country, according to Education Week, in K through 12 specifically, in terms of quality of education. Now we're number 8 in America. I don't think anybody in Florida ever imagined that would happen. I can remember so many times that people from up north would come down here and say, it's a beautiful state, but your schools are terrible. Well, that's just not the case anymore. And I think we should be very pleased about that. And finally, ethics. I think that the level of the culture of corruption that exists, regrettably, in South Florida to a large degree, but it's not exclusive here. I've had to now remove or suspend 38 public officials since I've been here. And that's not a happy duty, but it's one that I take seriously. And trying to restore the public trust in government is something, frankly, that you all have worked very hard on, and I appreciate that. But I think the government has a tremendous responsibility. Your state attorney, I think, has laid out a pretty good roadmap of ideas and suggestions from a grand jury report that he conducted. We are now conducting one, as you're aware. I asked the Florida Supreme Court to impanel a statewide grand jury to augment the great work of our state attorneys. Bernie McCabe and Kathy Fernandez-Rundle, Mike Satz in Broward, so many have done such a great job, Mark Over in Hillsborough, and because of their great work, we know what's happening around the state, and they're prosecuting these cases to their credit. And I think that if there are ways that we can augment that with better laws, stricter statutes that make it harder for people to violate the public trust, we owe them that and nothing less. And the environment, proud of the Everglades purchase that we're making. Just made some new appointments to the South Florida Water Management District. Very pleased about the new appointees to the Public Service Commission. I think they're back on the side of the public again, finally. There was some criticism that they weren't, experienced enough inside that process. That's precisely why I picked them. was to get people who weren't sort of polluted by it, but rather would have a clear beginning, a new fresh start, if you will, and fight for the people. And with that, it's probably too much of a good one.
That's okay. We'll come back to a couple of those topics in just a few minutes,
Sure.
but I know we'd like to start out with the big political story in the state, and that's the
Spending?
the release of the credit card documents by Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
He says that your campaign or a political ally of yours released those documents. Is that true?
I don't know. I suspect it was not an ally of his. But I think the important point here is getting the truth out.
So you think release of the documents is proper?
Of course it is. I've advocated that. Yeah, I mean, transparency is always proper, in my view. And, you know, we have a tremendous history in Florida of sunshine law. And I think that, I believe it was Governor Askew who really advocated that initially in a significant way, to have transparency. And you know this better than me. In the nation, I think Florida's looked at a place where, as far as journalism is concerned, we have the best sunshine laws, First Amendment laws in the country. And we should be proud of that.
So you disagree with his argument that these were confidential party documents and should not have been released without basically the party's authorization?
I do disagree. I think that, you know, having the truth out is always good and always appropriate. And who would complain about true facts being in the public arena when you're in the public arena? I mean, there's an irony to that that is rather astounding to me. And I think rather than whining and complaining, people need to own up to their personal responsibility. You know, I have a credit card. It's my card, like most Floridians. You know, I use my own personal card. And, you know, I know some corporations have corporate cards or what have you. But, you know, to use those things for personal expenses is just clearly wrong. I mean, why do you get a haircut with a credit card? Why do you charge, you know, from a wine store? I don't know what the items were. You know, I don't want to harp on it too much, but, you know, the people will make up their decision on what they think about these things. If they thought they were appropriate or inappropriate, I think it was inappropriate. You know,
he calls it an act of desperation.
Well, it looks like an act of financial desperation when you're charging a $7 sandwich at Chick-fil-A. That doesn't sound like sound financial management of your personal income. That's desperate to me. You know, that's rather stunning when you think about it.
Well, how does that compare?
Who's the truth ever did?
How does that compare with the $320 you spent on electric fans on that 12-day mission to London? I mean, to bring up a $133 haircut, it seems like it's fair to bring up and question the spending on that trip last summer.
Well, I'm a conservationist. You know, if we can save air conditioning and use fans, if you go to any major corporation or small business, I bet it's true here. You know, people will have fans in their cubicle because they want to be a little cooler. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
There's a wider credit card scandal, as you know, with the Republican Party of Florida that has some Democrats talking about a special prosecutor.
David Washington Schultz, I think, was
right yesterday.
So, yeah.
Most records indicate that this problem got significantly worse after Jim Greer, who you installed as party chairman, took over in 2007. Do you think you have any responsibility for the wider credit card problem at the Republican Party of Florida?
I don't think so. I think that, you know, let's talk about what Republicans tout and state that they believe in. They believe in personal responsibility. I do. Frankly, I think most people do, regardless of party, as a matter of fact. But so I think personal responsibility is first and foremost something that people ought to own up to. And, you know, it doesn't matter what position you may hold or the fact that you're, you know, one of my bosses, a citizen. I think personal responsibility is the order of the day. And that's what people talk about a lot during campaigns, particularly this year. And I think each individual has a responsibility to own up to their own personal responsibilities, their own actions. I certainly will do that on behalf of myself. I'm sure the chairman will on behalf of himself. And I assume at some point the speaker will come to that conclusion.
Do you think Jim Greer did a good job as state party chairman?
Yeah, I do. Now, do I think it was perfect? No, I don't. But I think that what I really admired about former Chairman Greer was the level of outreach that he strove for in terms of minority recruitment, reaching out to African Americans, reaching out to Hispanics. It's something that we talk about quite a bit, and it's something my administration has worked very hard to do as well, because Florida is probably the most diverse state in the country. And it seems to me that, you know, whether it's a cabinet position or a secretary of my administration, a member of the Florida Supreme Court, I have worked very, very hard to appoint Hispanics, African Americans, and others to these positions. And it's one of the things I admire most about the work we did.
But if the incoming Speaker of the Florida House pulls several $100,000 from the party accounts because he's worried about misspending, what does that say about your choice of Jim Greer, who was overseeing the party at this time?
Well, I think that, if I understand what you're talking about, I think Dean Cannon. Yeah. I think that occurred after Chairman Greer had already determined he was stepping in, so I don't know exactly what to say.
Okay.
You'd have to ask Speaker Designate Cannon.
There is a political question we have had from a number of readers related to this race that I wanted to ask you, and I'll just read what one person sent in. Governor Crist, you appear to be more pragmatic than ideological, and that pragmatism has worked at times to Florida's advantage, such as accepting stimulus money. You are being outflanked on the right by a candidate who is just the opposite. If you do fail to get the Republican nomination for the Senate, will you consider making a run as an independent? Now, obviously, nobody could decide after the primary to run as an independent, but have you considered at any point running as a third-party candidate for the Senate?
I have not. Now, that is not to say that people don't give me political advice all the time on that and other issues, but that is not my intent. I'm a Republican. I'm proud to be a Republican. I'm very proud to be from the party of Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, and others. And so, no, it's not my intent at all.
So you will not run as a third-party candidate?
That's right.
Governor, speaking of that stimulus money, you accepted up to 15.
If I could, well, I think you're wondering.
Okay, well, you accepted up to 15.
I was going to come back to that part of Randy's question.
Accepted up to $15 billion in federal stimulus money from the Obama administration, and that was to save jobs. But soon after you leave office, that money goes away. What are you doing now to keep Florida from falling off a cliff then?
Well, there is some good news. I mean, I understand that we're still in a very dire economic situation. But I also understand that for the first time since I have been governor, we actually have more revenue coming into the state treasury as opposed to less. And it's not just a little bit more. According to the estimators, it's $2 billion more coming in that we would be able to utilize for this upcoming fiscal year. So making that point gives me some degree of confidence that hopefully this economy is starting to turn around. I mean, you all understand how Florida gets most of our money for the state budget is through sales tax revenue. So if we're getting $2 billion more in sales tax revenue, essentially, to help our budget, something's going on in Florida, and that is additional consumer confidence, or they wouldn't be making these purchases that would in turn into $2 billion more coming into the treasury. So my hope, and I hope everyone's hope in Florida and America, is that this economic downturn will turn around, will start to move forward. I'm an optimist, and I'm sometimes praying for that.
But $2 billion a year doesn't make up for $6 or $7 billion a year that is going to be lost.
Right.
Is there? Are you going to advocate collecting sales tax on internet sales or something else to try to plug that hole that is still going to be there after you have left off?
No, that's not something I'm warm and fuzzy about. I think that increasing taxes at this time would be the wrong thing to do. In fact, I've advocated a $100 million decrease in taxes for this coming session. I hope the House and Senate will go along with that. We have good sponsors as it relates to the back-to-school tax holiday. I think that's the right thing to do for Florida families. They need it. That's a time when I think they need it an awful lot when their children are going back to school, getting school supplies. And I think that the other part of the $100 million cut is to small businesses across our state. It's a 1% reduction in the corporate income tax. I mean, as you know, we have no state income tax, personal, and I'm very pleased about that, and glad that it's in our Constitution. But we do have a corporate income tax, and it strikes me that if we can reduce that burden on small businesses, let them have more of that money, then in turn, they might be able to utilize those funds to hire people.
Didn't that just put you deeper in the hole?
Not that much, because of the $2 billion number coming in, you have $100 million, remember, in tax cuts being proposed. In addition to that, we're very aggressively involved in this race to the top effort in education. Eric Smith, our Commissioner of Education, has worked incredibly well with a number of groups on the race to the top, the Foundation for Florida's Future, the Florida Council of 100, the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and others to try to receive this grant, which could mean, again, another $1 billion for Florida in the area of education. That would be a tremendous benefit for our school children, for our teachers. I think we have a very good shot to get it. We could get word of that as early as next week. Last weekend, I was in Washington, had the chance to meet with Secretary Arnie Duncan. And on this, you know, the administration is getting it right. It really centers around teacher quality, around accountability. And it's a stiff competition, I understand that, but I think Florida is well poised.
Isn't that temporary money, though, also?
It may be, but I think they're proposing a second round of race to the top.
Even if you got all of the race to the top money, it would not replace the $1 billion a year you're using in stimulus money for education now.
No, I didn't say that it would. I understand.
Right, but so what I'm getting at is
I do.
you still get a gap, both in education and in the overall budget. And what I'm not hearing is how how the state is going to make up that gap.
Well, we can live within our means. There's a notion.
We didn't live within our means except for the gift we got from the federal government and the stimulus.
It's not completely true. Remember, if you were with me, when I got elected governor, our state budget was $73 billion. We had enormous revenues coming in prior to my administration, which we had continued, but it didn't. And so you deal with what you're dealt. And so again, along the lines of living within our means, our choice instead of raising taxes was to reduce spending. In fact, we reduced the budget by about $7 billion.
But you raised lots of fees.
We did. That's true. There's that gap, as Jack points out.
Is there a difference between a fee and a tax to the
Without a
average
doubt.
person?
Yeah, of course there is. I mean, well, let's talk about the cigarette tax. More pointed.
Surcharge, I believe,
Whatever you want
Republicans
to call it.
it.
I'll call it a tax. I don't
Okay.
care. It doesn't
Okay.
matter to me. I mean, let's call it what it is, and I think it's a fee, a user fee, clearly. I mean, you don't have to pay it unless you buy the cigarettes. So, you know, and estimates I've seen are that there may be 2 million people out of almost 20 million that smoke. Now, a tax, to me, is defined as something that hits everybody, like the sales tax. That's something that my opponent proposed when he was in power as Speaker. That would have been a $9 billion increase. And so that's a tax, you know, because it hits everybody. You virtually have no choice in order to do it. And in the case of the cigarette fee, tax, surcharge, whatever you want to call it, it's a health issue too. I mean, my father happens to be a physician, and you know, always advocated to us kids as we're growing up, you know, to not smoke. And I got heavily lobbied by the Florida Medical Association, the American Medical Association, Family Physicians Society, to go ahead and approve that surcharge in order to help the future health of our fellow Floridians. I thought it was the right thing to do, so I let it go through.
One of the proposals that probably will come out of could come out of the legislature with regard to jobs is to allow oil and natural gas drilling in state waters, 3 miles to 10 miles offshore. If the legislature passes a bill to allow drilling in those waters, will you sign it?
It depends on the technology. Listen, I love Florida, and I grew up in St. Petersburg, and I remember cleaning up after an oil spill in Tampa Bay in the 60s when I was a kid.
1969.
All right, very good. And, you know, although that came from a tanker, obviously, not a rig, but be that as it may, if there is technology that can provide confidence that that can be done in a manner that is safe, that will maintain our beach cleanliness, which dovetails into our tourist industry, which is incredibly important to all of us, and jobs, then I would consider it.
The people supporting drilling say that the technology is safe. Critics point out that similar technology off the coast of Australia malfunctioned and caused a big oil spill a few months ago. What's your threshold for believing in the safety of the technology?
Well, a greater degree of confidence. And to the legislation.
Do you have that confidence now?
Not yet, but I'm close. And I want to keep open-minded about it because I think it's important not only for the opportunity to have those resources and then the royalties that it would produce for Florida and help us with the gap that is important to address. But in addition to that, I think it's a bit of a national security issue as well. We spend an awful lot of money purchasing oil from a lot of people overseas who really don't like America a whole lot. And I think that if we're able to be more independent in terms of our oil reserves, our utilization of our resources in an appropriate, safe fashion, that's a good thing for America. So I would keep open-minded about it. There's another part of that legislation that is a check and balance too, which I think is helpful. And that is, even if the legislation would pass, and if I would sign the bill, that doesn't automatically trigger the fact that we would begin right away. Then it would go and fall to the cabinet to be able to make an approval before it would continue. So you've got a couple of checks and balances, which I think is a smart way to approach it, because I think we owe that to the people of our state.
I'd like to talk a little bit about Everglades politics that kind of culminated in the inland port decision. The state seemed to want to play a role in it, and then he sort of backed on a bit and allowed the Port of Palm Beach to go ahead and make a selection. Why didn't the state make a bigger play there and take over that decision?
I don't know that that's a done deal yet. I think that we have a desire to participate in the inland port. And obviously the Everglades has been a significant focus of my administration. The purchase of the 73,000 acres, I think, is incredibly important. We had to scale that back from about 180,000 because of the economic reality we were facing. But I think that, again, the duty to be good stewards of the land, to preserve this international treasure, if you will, for future generations of Floridians is an important part of good stewardship and good conservationist activity. And so we maintain a focus on it. It's the reason I picked the 3 new people that I did for the South Florida Water Management District. I interviewed each of them individually and posed the question about how do you feel about the Everglades? Specifically, how do you feel about the purchase? Do you support it? It's very important to my administration. I mean, once you're appointed, you have free will, obviously, but it was a concern that I had. And it may relate back to the inland port and whether or not it's Palm Beach County's decision alone. I think it's a combined issue between perhaps the county and the state as to where that port ultimately ends up. There's a lot of people in the Clewiston area that I have concern about their future employment. If the U.S. sugar property is not continued to be utilized to produce sugar beyond 7 or 10 years, then you have to think about what's the future for their economic possibilities, if you will. And I think that being focused on that and inland port still having the chance to be located a little bit more westerly may not be a bad idea. And there's a rail there that would support it too, which is important.
There's a related question from a reader. In fact, it's a former mayor of Belglade. He says, you have compared the national significance of the U.S. Sugar Corporation land purchase to the 1803 Louisiana purchase. That being the case, is it fair, equitable, that the burden of that $1 billion deal, which of course is not quite $1 billion deal, it's about $600 million, rest on the backs of the taxpayers in just a few South Florida counties, as opposed to the state paying for it?
Mm-hmm. I think that what's fair is that we have a forward vision. And, I can't afford to buy land. I don't have a credit card that big. I think that we have a duty as people of this country, as I said earlier, to be good stewards, to be conservationists. I mean, who paid for the national parks? The people did. And this is an extension of a national park, essentially. And so I don't think it's unfair.
The point Mr. Altman's making, and others, as you know, have made it, is this was all done without really approval by any elected representatives. In fact, there's a bill in the legislature that would make all the members of the Water District Board elected, not appointed. And he asked, would the executive branch, including you, have the power to commit $1 billion of state funds without legislative approval? $600 million, more specifically.
Right. Well, we have an opportunity to do that, and the Water Management District continues to review, scrutinize, and see if it's appropriate and if the bonding can be done. I'm confident that it can. I'm confident that they want to do it. I'm confident that it's good for Florida, and more so good for Florida in the future.
And speaking of this issue and the overarching ethics issue that's out there, should the public be wary at all that this deal was negotiated on behalf of U.S. Sugar by your former chief of staff's law firm?
No, they shouldn't at all be worried about that. Everything's done in the public view. I think everybody knows everything there is to know about this. And, hell, I announced it myself in the Everglades. And
but those negotiations weren't in the public between U.S. Sugar and the state.
It was just an idea that I had. This would be a good thing to do if we could get to the place where we would have a willing seller. And we tried to work with Florida Crystals and U.S. Sugar. I mean, they're the ones who hold the most land there. Let's face what the facts are. And if you're going to have a chance to do this, to really have a clear water flow, to restore that natural flow, for the first time in the history of our state, for a very long time, since people sort of chopped up the Everglades a long time ago and tried to drain it or whatever it was they were doing, why wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, why wouldn't you want to preserve this international treasure? To me, it's so clear it's the right thing to do. It's been advocated by many for so long and for so many years, not just to preserve the land that is there and the natural beauty that it provides, but the natural water flow that it was originally intended to have.
But can the state afford it? Can the state afford it? Can you afford to do the improvements on the land that are going to be necessary to carry out that vision?
I believe that we can. And you have to be kind of bold to do things like this. They don't just happen by the squeamish proposition of if, but, can we, can't we. You got to say, look, this is what we should do. And this is what we need to do. Now, being practical and pragmatic, we scaled it down because the economy scaled down. But we still have the opportunity to have the most important part of this land be utilized for the restoration of that water flow to help the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie River. We've already, poured a lot of money into making sure that those rivers are more clean. I mean, you know how it used to be. They used to have all the dumping out of the lake all the time. And that doesn't happen under my administration. There's a reason. I'm trying to clean it up. It's not an easy thing to do. It's hard to do. And people criticize it a lot because they liked it the old way. They like using your water for them. And what I'm trying to do is preserve that water for the people. And, U.S. Sugar was willing to do it. God bless them. Florida Crystals wasn't. Too bad. There we are.
Switching gears to national issues, can you tell us if you agree with your GOP colleagues about scrapping the health care bills that are currently under consideration in Congress right now?
Well, I thought yesterday was kind of a hopeful day. At least to have people sitting around the table and have the opportunity for both parties to have significant input. I don't know how much is going to come out of that healthcare summit. It didn't look terribly promising by the end of the day, but you never know. Until you have the chance to sit down and articulate ideas, you don't know if you might find out if you're closer than you think. Because what we see out of Washington, I think, is a very dysfunctional group. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. A lot of people up there, I think, are working very hard, and they're very sincere about what they do. But at the same time, it's so politicized and so partisan that I don't know how much they're going to be able to do this year at all.
But you're not answering my question. Do you agree to scrap the health care bills or not?
Well, I think there may be parts of it that you don't have to scrap. There are three parts of it that I would like to see scrapped. It would raise taxes significantly, it would raise rates significantly, and it would take $500 billion out of Medicare.
So what would you like, what are those three parts you want to see scrapped?
I'd like to see those three parts scrapped. Yeah, I don't want to see that. I think the real issue here, as it relates to healthcare, is that people want it to not cost so much, and people want to have access to it. I think there is a consensus of agreement that the healthcare that is delivered in America is good, but it's not easy to get it, and it's too expensive when you do get it. And so I think Florida can be a bit of a model here. One of the greatest concerns I had coming in as your governor, as it relates to healthcare, is the fact that out of our almost 20 million people, 4 million had no healthcare coverage at all. So we wanted to try to do something that would give them the opportunity to be able to afford it, at least a little bit easier. So we took a free market approach. We negotiated with the legislature's consent with health insurance companies across the state. And we came up with this Cover Florida Health Plan. And instead of, $500 or $600 a month for individual coverage, we were able to, because of a pooling opportunity of potentially 4 million customers, get it down to about $150 a month on average. That's a significant saving. And for some people, if you're young and healthy, it could be as little as $25 a month to have coverage.
Well, how successful has that been? My understanding is there are not that many people enrolled in that program.
It's approaching about 6,000. And I guarantee you, for every one of those individuals and their families, they would consider it a great success.
Let's ask the healthcare question a different way. What is in the Democrats' bills that you do like?
I don't think a whole lot. Watching the discussion yesterday, you get a chance to sort of see more of it be ferreted out. I'm a kind of guy who, as you said, Randy, I'm pragmatic. The stimulus is a great example. We needed the money. I mean, that's why every other Republican governor took it too. I was just maybe a little more honest and straightforward about it. Well, shame on me for being honest. But, as it relates to health care, if there are good ideas, I'm willing to look at them. And I would take that same approach to any issue in Washington. I think that, whether
So are there any parts of the bills that you like?
Not at present, no.
So
but
there is not one good idea in the bills?
There may be. I'm pretty focused on Florida right now. I mean, after the session, I'll be more focused on issues of Washington. But I've got to do my first job first, and that's why Cover Florida is important to me. That's why the stimulus money and how it affected my fellow Floridians is where my focus is. I'm a hard worker. I work very hard every single day for the people who are kind enough to give me this job. And I'm laser focused on education for our children here in Florida today, health care for our fellow Floridians here today, making sure that we utilize their monies wisely today. And that's really where my focus has been and should be, at least for the near term.
The pocketbook issues have been the dominating issue for your 4 years in office. We know your work on insurance and property taxes and now PSC. But unemployment is still almost 12%. How would you rate your response to economic development issues in the state over the last 3 years?
How would I rate it? I'll let others rate it. But I think that when you realize that property insurance has gone down, the cost of it, since I've been your governor, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. When you realize that property taxes, according to a report that came out of the legislature 2 weeks ago, have gone down 7%, or almost $3 billion, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Those were the two double whammy issues that the governor's raised, right, at least when we came into the home stretch. It was property taxes, property insurance, and we addressed them. More to do, but a pretty darn good start, I would argue. It's about a $7 billion decrease we've experienced in those areas. And I think that, the duty is to continue to stay on that track and continue to work on pocketbook issues. The utility issue with the PSC is no small potato either. And, before you had people on the Public Service Commission that would, almost unilaterally just say, okay, we'll give you your, grandiose fee increase that you want. That is not the case anymore. And it's because of who I appointed as governor. And that's a new day. It's a new day with property insurance. It's a new day with property taxes. I'm very proud of what we've been able to do in a very difficult economic situation.
Well, then for those who would rate your work on economic development, what do you have to show in that area?
I don't know. We saved Piper aircraft from leaving. We've got an enormous new development of clean energy for Florida. But just for example, when I was elected governor, we were last in solar energy development in America. Last. And we're the Sunshine State. And people told me, experts, quote unquote, told me when I got elected, well, you really shouldn't pursue that because we don't have enough sunshine in Florida to really support it. I thought, well, that just defies common sense and logic. So I pursued it anyway. And now we've gone from dead last to number 2 in America in solar energy development. And I criticize FPL in some instances, but in this area, they deserve great credit because they've really been the champion and the leader of it. We have the largest solar array panel in North America now. And, we've done some very good things, I think. And we've also kept a lot of harm from occurring. And Mike, you know as well as I do that the last lagging indicator of an economy starting to turn back around is that unemployment number. It's a painful number. I get it. I mean, I was at a Florida State Fair about 3 weeks ago, and I ran into an old friend from Florida State University, a very smart, accomplished guy, majored in accounting, had a significant job as a CEO of a significant corporation. Ran into him, said hello to him, and I said, how are you doing? He said, not so well. I said, what's going on? He said, I'm out of work. I said, how long have you been unemployed? He said, 15 months. That's why I took the stimulus money. I can't in good conscience look into the eyes of the people that I work for and not be pragmatic and not say we need it. It saved at least 87,000 jobs in Florida. Had we had a different governor, I don't know if that would have happened. So I think that's a pretty good thing to have a governor who's got a compassionate heart, who cares about people, about politics. It's pretty political. That's okay. I'm not here for that purpose. I'm here to serve and do the very best I can in a difficult storm, make sure that we get to the shore.
Speaking of economic troubles, the legislature did nothing last year with regard to foreclosure legislation. We have a couple of questions from readers saying, what would you ask the legislature to do to help people who are facing foreclosure? And this is a two-part question. What would you ask the legislature to do now? And if you're elected to the Senate, what should Congress do?
I think Congress may have a better opportunity. I think they have more regulatory authority as it relates to much of the banking industry. And I think the Congress is looking at that already. So if I had an opportunity, judge me by my record as to what I would do as it relates to large corporations and the regulation thereof in order to benefit the people of our state, or if I get elected to the U.S. Senate, our entire country. I mean, I'm the guy who went after insurance companies. I don't think any administration in the history of this state's ever really done that in an aggressive fashion the way we did. Well, we did it. I went after utility companies. I mean, I did it back when I was a state senator. I filed suit against then Florida Power Corporation, and I paid my own money to file the lawsuit out of my pocket. That's just the kind of guy I am. And so if you want to see what I would do and be able to forecast what I would do as a United States Senator, whether it's banking or any other industry, sometimes big business can be as bad as big government. I mean, sometimes they get pretty sloth-like too, and arrogant. And so
here's one specific because it's been fairly controversial. Do you think that Congress should give judges the authority to redo mortgages?
Why not? Why not give them that flexibility? I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that notion, Randy. I think that anything that can be done to help people in a difficult situation that is reasonable is just that. It's reasonable and practical and the right thing to do. When you're in a difficult economic situation, you do things ordinarily you might not do. And you advocate things because, you have to sort of adapt and adjust to the times at hand. And when you realize, that you run into people that you went to college with and they're out of work, or go to unemployment offices, which I do on a regular basis, and people need help. People need to eat. They need to have gainful employment. I mean, it's not just hitting the real estate market, it's hitting your business too. It's hitting all businesses in our state. But I'm confident we'll get through it, and I think that, we'll be okay. It's just going to take a little while.
You appointed, as you said, a grand jury to look at public corruption. A couple of readers want to know, given the coverage that's been in the Palm Beach Post about prescription pill clinics, basically called pill mills.
Right.
Why haven't you impaneled a grand jury to look at that? and would you do so?
Maybe I will. I mean, I'm trying to do as much as I can. There's a lot on the plate. It's not a boring time for me in my life. And, I'm certainly, as I said earlier, willing to look at any issue in a practical, pragmatic fashion. And if convinced that I think it's that significant a problem, certainly I'd be willing.
Is there an appropriate, well, not an appropriate, but you mentioned that the unemployment rate is the last indicator of return.
Well, that's what I hear from economists, people that are much smarter about those things than I.
So well, where's that unemployment rate need to be in the next year?
Lower. Don't you agree? I mean, I think we all want it to be lower. I mean, what number? I don't know. But, you want it to be lower because you care about people and you want them to be able to have a job. And that's why I took the stimulus money and I don't apologize for it. I mean, that gave us the opportunity to save 20,000 educators' jobs. I mean, what kind of guy or gal would you want to have as your governor who would say, I'm affiliated with a certain ideology, and so I can't take that, the people be damned. Well, that's not the kind of leader I want. That's not the kind of person I want in public office, allegedly, supposedly looking out for the public interest and the public good and the greater good and their well-being. I think you want somebody who says, we want the unemployment number to be down. And you fight every day as much as you can to do it. And that's what we're doing.
And just to be clear, you never had a Republican Party credit card?
Right, that's correct. Never have.
Anyone?
I don't need one. I have my own credit card. What do I need a party card for?
Does that include Carol? Did she ever have a party credit card or access to a card?
No, of course not.
Can you, I saw an interview recently where you described yourself as pro-life. Can you describe, what does that mean with respect to the abortion issue, and how has your position evolved since you were in the legislature back in the 90s?
Well, yeah, I'm pro-life. What that means is that I believe in the sanctity of life. That it's important, I think, in our society to understand that life is precious and it is to be cherished. And even on behalf of the unborn, I think we have a duty and responsibility to protect it. That's what I think.
So as a person running for office, does that mean, do you favor overturning Roe v. Wade, or do you favor any restrictions on abortion rights beyond what's there now, if you're in Congress?
I don't know. My position is that I would rather change hearts than law. And I think we've aggressively done that in our administration as it relates to adoption. In fact, I'm very proud that Jim Callinger, who heads our Office of Adoption in the governor's office, we've broken records the past 2 years in the number of adoptions that have been made in Florida. And I think that kind of example and that kind of leadership is what people want. I'm not here to impose my positions and my will on other people. I have things that I feel strongly about. It doesn't mean that George should have to do them or Randy should have to do it. I also believe in freedom. I think freedom is a cherished thing that's important for us to recognize and respect, and I do.
Given that love of freedom and the wish to see as many children adopted as possible, does it make sense for Florida to restrict gays and lesbians when it comes to adopting?
Well, it depends on how you feel. I mean, my belief is that, the best way to raise a family is in the traditional family. That's how I feel, and that's what the current law is in Florida, and I respect the law.
Sure, but almost every credible public health, adoption, and psychological group has said that in cases where there is no other option, a child or children going into a single-gender home does not suffer for it. Why does Florida continue to have this law that we all know was passed in a wave of what amounted to homophobia in the late 70s?
Because the legislature hasn't taken it off the books yet.
Should the legislature?
I think it's up to them to decide. I don't advocate for a change.
Do you hope that the Florida Supreme Court or the 3rd District Court of Appeal overturns it?
No, I don't hope for that.
Okay.
Well, you took proudly took Shylock out of the state statutes a couple of years ago. There's plenty of folks who think that trumpeting the diversity of the state in your administration. There's plenty of people who think that statute there's inherent there's similar problems with that statute, not necessarily the term homosexual, but the thought expressed in that statute. Do you believe that?
You said it's not a statute anymore. You said it was taken out?
Yeah, you had a press conference when Shylock was taken out of the statutes,
Right.
But that the word homosexual appears one time in the state statutes. It's to restrict abortion. Or, it's restrict adoption.
Yes, sir.
There's plenty of people who think there is a similar problem with that statute.
I understand. I don't advocate for the change, as I mentioned to Randy. If people feel that way, I would recommend that they appeal to their state House of Representatives or their state senator. It's the power of the people.
Governor, you said Florida ranks 8th in that Education Week study, and that's correct. But we rank 8th largely because we now have the FCAT, we have the Sunshine State Standards. But our high school grades on FCAT are very low. There hasn't been any improvement in the high school reading FCAT, for example. And in fact, Florida got, in that same study, an F on college readiness. How do you...
There's more to do. We're not done yet. I mean,
how
there's
serious
always...
is the failure of even 50% of high school students to score on grade level on the FCAT?
Well, any failure is serious. and I'm not being funny. I mean, I really believe that. And so, that's why we will continue to strive forward, even this session, to have a continued focus on teacher quality, on making sure that we do take a measure of what happens in the classroom. And I think that it's the right way to go. It's brought us a long way. Has it brought us all the way I want it to be? I'd rather be number 1 than number 8. But, we're not 31st anymore either. So I think we're moving in the right direction. And that's good for our students. And, again, it's a duty that I think we all have to them. We shouldn't have underperforming schools continue to just go on and just because. And that's one of the great things about Race to the Top from the federal administration. They agree with that. There can be consensus.
You mentioned ethics in your preamble. Would you advocate the legislature to pass laws that would send corrupt politicians to prison, that would strengthen what's on the statutes now?
Yeah, I don't want to disclose too much of my State of the State speech, but I'll say yes.
On that point, though, the state attorney from Palm Beach County, who you credited for doing good work in this and impaneling his grand jury, sent you, right, Mike McAuliffe, sent you that report in May of last year and didn't hear back from you for many months. You took action on the grand jury for public corruption after a couple of high-profile cases in Broward County involving contributors who had links to you. Was that a coincidence, or had you been thinking about this push for public corruption all along?
I've been thinking about it for quite a while. I mean, since I began in public service. When I first got elected to the state Senate, it was then Senate President Andrew Crenshaw appointed me to chair the Senate Ethics Committee. I mean, it's something that's always been important to me. And, you try to get around to things as quickly as you can in a responsible way. We got the report essentially when the session was over. Not a whole lot you can do directly in terms of changing the law at that stage. I mean, I guess you could argue you could call a special session. That's true. But we have a session coming up. And, with the buildup of all the suspensions and all the removals and all the replacements that I've had to put into, county commissions or sheriffs it's pretty much across the board disaster, if you will, as it relates to public confidence and public trust and the replacements I've had to make. And with that buildup came an anxiety in me that said, we ought to impanel a statewide grand jury, and so I did. Could I have done it sooner? Perhaps.
There actually is a specific question related to the Senate on this topic, and that's the federal honest services fraud law that was used to send the 3 Palm Beach County commissioners to prison. There's a case before the Supreme Court now where the argument is that law is too vague. Do you agree that the federal honest services law is too vague?
I haven't had a chance to review it. I doubt that it's vague. The Supreme Court will have the wisdom to make that determination. That's why those judges are there. But you always want, in any law, for it to be as clear as possible. I'm a lawyer, and you're former Attorney General, and lawyers will try to interpret different laws in a way that benefits their clients. I'm sure that'll happen in this case as it does with any other. And if it benefits their client, they'll say that it's vague. If it doesn't, they'll say that it's clear. And the judges will make a determination about how they feel. But it's
Senator
probably
Gelber,
relatively clear.
Senator Gelber has had a bill for 2 or 3 years in a row that didn't even get a hearing to put that into state law. Why didn't you get behind it?
I would support it. I think I have supported it. But, I don't run the Florida Senate. I do a lot, but not all of it, as much as I can.
You mentioned a jobs proposal in your preamble. Could you be a little more specific and tell us what are you going to present at the session to get more jobs for the state?
Several things. I mentioned earlier the $100 million tax cut that would benefit small business, give them more of their money back so they hopefully would have the resources to be able to hire more people. In addition to that, the continued funding of the Office of Tourism, Trade, and Economic Development, so that we have quick action funds that give us the chance to reach out to Piper and say, we want you to stay in the state. Here's an incentive to do so. And so we'll advocate that yet again. To make one-stop shopping at the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. They have over 1 million licensees, from barber shops to lawn service, what have you, and make it easier for those small businesses, those institutions of entrepreneurship, if you will, to make it an easier process for them to interact with their government, get the license so that they can get moving and provide jobs for that lawn service or that barber shop or beauty salon or whatever it might be. Those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do. And improve education. There's been a real resurgence, if you will, in our community colleges because people want to go back to get additional training, perhaps in a trade, rather than in liberal arts, for example, so that they can make themselves more marketable. Well, I support that, so we're advocating additional resources for that very purpose. And I should say, I think we have the best community college system in America, and most people agree on that. So why not reward them and therefore help the people have a better opportunity to be more marketable and get more jobs?
Let's come back to national politics as we're winding up.
Okay.
The Tea Party, which has pretty much embraced Marco Rubio in the Republican Senate campaign.
New York Times put him on the cover as such, I think.
Right. National Review, I think.
Not for the Tea Party.
Right. If you listen to many of the people who claim to be Tea Party voters and to leaders of the Tea Party, the sentiment seems to be that great action has to be taken now, 1770s action, because the country has gone so badly just in the last year. There seems to be their point of focus. Do you believe that the country's problems all date to the inauguration of Barack Obama? And if you don't, where do you think the blame is for the state the country is in?
Well, listen, the greatest, I think, anxiety, anger, and despair throughout the country is generated, in my humble opinion, by the economic downturn. That creates fear. Quite understandable. And, this time last year, there was a even greater fear, I think, that the institutions of America, the financial institutions of our country, the economy itself, were going to literally fall off the cliff into the economic abyss. And that did not occur. And I think to some degree, because of the stimulus and because of people working hard and because of a belt tightening around the country, who's to blame for that? I don't know if you can
Not so much to blame for that, but to blame for what led us to the near economic collapse of the fall of 2008.
I'm sure there's enough blame to go around all over the place, but I think the realization is, again, it was a global economic meltdown. These things happen on occasion. You have recessions, and we had a Great Depression. They're calling this the Great Recession. My hope is that it turns around sooner than later. Exactly what caused it, people will analyze for a long time and try to figure out why exactly this occurred. Why did the Great Depression occur? Why did we reach 25% unemployment back then? There's probably economists on all ends of the political spectrum that have different theories about why and who's to blame.
If you look at the signs at Tea Party rallies, many of them refer to the president as, in no particular order, a communist, a socialist, a fascist, and a tyrant. Are any of those labels justified?
I don't think labels are justified. I think
Are
that
any of those labels justified with
I
regard
don't
to
think-
Barack Obama?
I don't think labels are justified generally, and I think they're counterproductive. People have a right to express their view. You're in that business. The First Amendment says that people can do that. God bless them. It's not how I choose to articulate my verbiage. I think that there is a certain level of respect that is due to the office of the President of the United States. I treat him in a decent fashion because I was raised that way. And some in my party criticize me for having done that. I really don't care if they do because I'm not going to change. When the President of the United States comes to my state for the first time after he's been inaugurated, less than a month after he's been inaugurated, I'm going to be there to welcome him on behalf of all of Florida. I am the governor of all of the people of this state, and I have a duty to represent them in a way that I believe comports with what they want, with the kind of decency that I think they deserve. And that's why I do what I do, and that's why I act how I act. And, you know, if that's out of favor or out of fashion, that's okay.
And what about the argument by some that as Attorney General, you did not meet with then President Bush when he came to Florida?
I had a conflict. Senator McCain had already obligated to meet with me in Jacksonville. Can I tell you?
Do you think that the Tea Party movement in general is helpful to politics at this time?
I think any involvement or activism or activity, we have to have people involved in order for it to work. Now, we don't know what the conclusion of any different group activity is going to have until we have the election. And so all of the people observing different movements, whatever they may be, will make their decisions about, you know, well, is this good or not so great, or what do you think, and which candidate do you attach more to that, and which do you think is maybe not attached to it, and elections will tell us how the people feel. But generally speaking, involvement is essential, yes.
And just on
I'd rather have that than not have
Right.
it.
Just one last related question. Mr. Rubio has pretty much directly or indirectly blamed you for the higher unemployment rate in Florida. Every time the rate has gone up, there's been a comment from the campaign saying you've done nothing and done nothing and done nothing. I assume you don't consider yourself responsible for the rising unemployment rate in Florida.
I'm doing everything I can to bring it down.
Okay, then do you also not believe Barack Obama is primarily responsible for the rising unemployment rate nationally?
I believe he's doing everything he can to try to bring it down, too.
Okay. Thank you, Governor.
Not at all. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. I really do enjoy this process. I didn't when we initially started doing these things when I was running for Commissioner of Education, I guess. But you get older and wiser, I think. And
You do?
Hopefully. It's better than getting older and dumber. I think that you all follow politics and issues extremely closely. And you know, I tried to read as much as I possibly can, and as I've told, you know, friends at the Times or the Tribune or the Times Union or the Herald, it's of great benefit to me as your governor to be even that much better informed and hopefully serve the people better. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Governor, good luck. Good luck. I assume